Hey everyone, you all seem to enjoy the last video like this that I made, so I'm gonna keep doing them. I'm gonna do them when I feel like doing them, when I feel inspired to do them, and today happens to be one of those days again. So two things before we get to the workout. One is it's leg day, and I'm training in my apartment gym, so you all will get to see my apartment gym. It's pretty well fitted, I would say. But the other thing is this conversation around volume, right? So there's the age-old question of, how much volume should you do? And much like any other big topic in the fitness industry, there are people who are kind of on different ends of the extremes. You have this low volume dogmatism, and then you have the high volume dogmatism, and then you have the reasonable people who are somewhere in between who say that it depends on context. But I still read comments on a fairly regular basis that to me indicate that people are still really confused about the volume question. So just before I get to my training, I want to explain my perspective on volume. And it's going to be really simple. I think it will probably be the most helpful perspective on volume that you have heard to date. Okay? And by helpful, I mean helpful. I don't mean like pedantic and abstract and how do I put this into practice? No, I mean very concrete. So this perspective was originally given to me through one of my friends who's a pro bodybuilder, basically simplifies volume this way, which is that more is more and less is less. Okay? That's the most obvious, intuitive thing to people when they hear it. But for whatever reason, people treat volume as if it works differently from that. So, what I mean by that is if we're going to count volume by sets per muscle group per week, 30 sets per muscle group per week is more than 20, and 20 is more than 10, and 10 is more than 5, and 5 is more than 1. And the more volume you do, the more stress you impose on a muscle, the more results that you will likely get, as long as you can not get hurt. If you keep that in mind, the volume equation becomes much more simple, much easier to apply to yourself. Why? Well, because ultimately what you do is the following. You take a guess, i.e., I'm going to do 8 sets for this muscle group per week to start. You take a guess, you do that for a certain period of time, let's say at least 2 months, 3 months, minimum in most cases. And then you observe the outcome. That's the scientific method, right? Like kind of in a nutshell, right? Applied to a specific context. You take a guess, you observe what happens, and then you make a change or not, depending on what you observed. So when you're considering how much volume should I do, two things you need to keep in mind. One, there is no universal right answer. Okay? And two, the reason there's no universal right answer is because the amount of stimulus per set will really dramatically alter how much volume you should do. So when I say more is more and less is less, yes, 30 is more than 20, but what if you do 30 sets that are 10 reps from failure and you do 20 sets that are all at 0 reps in reserve or no reps left in the tank? Well, obviously, the 20 sets is more than the 30 sets in that instance because you're doing 30 basically warm up sets, which is what a lot of people, I think, on the higher volume dogmatisms end of the spectrum end up doing is they do a million sets a week and none of them are remotely close to failure. And guess what? That can work. So when we're talking about more is more and less is less, what we're really saying is more stimulus is more stimulus and less stimulus is less stimulus. And what contributes to the stimulus per week for a muscle? It's how many sets you do, and then within those sets, how much effort you apply. So if I do 5 sets, all of them to failure, that will be probably more stimulus than 6 sets with all of them not to failure, right? All of them may be far from failure. Now, when those two things could be equated, is it 5 sets to failure equals 10 sets of, maybe 2 reps in reserve? I don't know. I don't know. But the whole sort of argument here, the whole perspective here is simply just to understand that more stimulus is more stimulus, and you will likely see more growth from more stimulus unless you get hurt or unless you can't recover because your nutrition and sleep suck. So if you start from that point, Then you can navigate any muscle group for any number of sets that you want. Oh, do you like to train your legs with lower volumes and higher efforts? Cool, you could do that. Oh, do you only like to do that for quads, but you like to do something different for hamstrings? Cool, you can do that. We're all talking about volume as if this is one category of things, and as if you need to apply that one strategy to all groups for all different kinds of people. That makes no freaking sense. Imagine if you were trying to get someone to lose weight and you said, this is the strategy you must use to lose weight. How often does that work? I mean, for some people, providing rigid guidelines they can follow is a great thing to do. But for other people, it's just going to be a total disaster because maybe they're eating no foods that they actually like. So when you, the viewer, hello, are trying to figure out how much volume you should do, follow that framework. Understand that more is more and less is less. So if you do less, you will probably get less. If you do more, you will probably get more, assuming you don't get hurt and assuming you can recover. From that point, take a fucking guess and stick with the guess. Stop, just drown out the noise around you, drown out all the people who say you must do this, you must do that, and just say, fuck that. I'm just going to think for myself for 2 months, 3 months. Take a guess and reassess. Let me give one concrete example before we get to the leg workout. Since the beginning of this year, I have been highly prioritizing my arms, okay, and my middle delts. And if you saw the long form video that I posted yesterday, you will know that in one arm workout, I will do approximately 6 sets for triceps, 6 sets for biceps, 6 sets for middle delts, and then 2 or 3 sets for the other elbow flexors. Someone commented and said, I think that's too much volume because I'm doing that twice a week. So I'm really doing anywhere from 12 to 15 sets for 1, 2, and 3. And by definition, it's not too much volume. And the reason I know it's not too much volume is because since the beginning of the year, I've put almost half an inch on the circumference of my arms. So whether or not something is appropriate can only be determined by whether or not it works. And whether or not it works, you can only understand through, say, something like just taking a simple circumference measurement, or just, I don't know, fucking looking at yourself in the mirror and seeing if you're changing. If you're not changing or you're getting worse, then something you're doing needs to be different. At which point you take a different guess, you apply the things that are related to that different guess, you do that for a while, you see what happens. As a starting point recommendation, because I don't want to just leave you all in the dark here, just start with like 5 to 10 sets per muscle group per week if it's a priority. And if you're comfortable training at least within a couple reps of failure. As you all will know, if you watched my video from yesterday, I do everything to failure all the time. And I prioritize how many sets, or I prioritize a muscle group by how many sets I do. So every set you will see on every video that I make, it's pretty much just to failure. I just go until I can't move. So transitioning into today's leg day, my leg days are relatively short and very low volume on the spectrum of how much volume could be done. So I do usually a couple sets of leg extensions, a couple sets of leg curls, a couple sets of some kind of lower body press, and then a couple sets of some kind of adduction motion. And that's it, I call it a day. Lower body aside from my calves, which I will train on upper body days, my Monday and Thursday, today's Wednesday. Lower body muscles are a very low priority for me. Although based on the way that my legs have looked over the last half year, since I've been applying this really, really low volume approach, they still seem to be growing at a rate that is not insignificant. So again, just remember, more is more and less is less. And you don't have to apply any one strategy to all groups or even groups that are very closely related. So quads for me are a higher priority than hamstrings. So I do more quads and less hamstrings. So I hope that helps. I know it was a long ramble. Maybe some of you just skipped this and went to the first timestamp of leg extension. But for those of you who didn't, let me know your perspective on that. I'm always interested in hearing from you all, as long as it's actually from you and not just a regurgitation from someone else. Anyway, so let's get to the gym. Start the leg day. All right, people. So starting off with leg extension, you all are witnessing The very first time I'm sitting down, I haven't even changed the settings. And for you consistent watchers, you will know that this is essentially how I like to warm up, by doing the exercise that I'm going to do. It's a crazy idea, right? So typically what I'll do with leg extension, as I do with all other exercise, is I do a couple reps, feel it out. A lot of times I'll do like holds like this at the top, play around with ankle motion, which I'll talk about in a sec, where I think your foot placement angle should be, really your ankle placement. We'll talk about that in a second, because there are some considerations to make there. And then what I'll do is I'll stay seated, and then I'll put the pin down a little bit. I'll do some more reps. If something feels creaky, I will pause in that creaky position, especially with knees and knee-related stuff. If you're someone who has knee-related issues, a good idea to maybe start with just some ISO stuff. I think a lot of people eventually arrive at a place with their leg extension where it can feel good, but they have to do like 20 non-specific drills to get there, when in reality they could just sit down on the leg extension, work through the creakiness, allow the reps to just naturally become more smooth as you escalate load, and then go from there. So this leg extension is because it's a combo machine, it's not that heavy. So right now the weight I just escalated to the second to highest weight. So I have now put the weight on the full stack. This is the weight that I'm going to use today. A couple of you were asking yesterday how I keep track of my progress if I don't count my reps. I count my reps kind of like very loosely. So I have an idea of like, did I do closer to 5 or 10 or 20? But like intra-set, I'm not actually counting. So I know that like the full stack historically for me on this machine, depending on how I do it, I can do for at minimum 10 to 15 reps. If I pause at the top for longer, it could be less. If I use a little bit more of a momentum-y type of tempo, it'll be more than 15. So basically what I've done to make progress on this is I've just become more and more strict with tempo. Eventually, if I'm able to do the stack for like really good paused reps for 20 plus, then I'm just going to swap to single leg and work up the progression that way. And it would surprise me if I could just full stack this machine with a single leg at any point, but who knows? Perhaps that's in the cards for me. So yeah, 2 sets here to begin with. This is literally my first set. I'm just going to go right into it. Oh boy. Okay. So I'll have to watch that back, but I'm willing to bet that was more than 10, but not more than maybe 16. Anyway, so much like with all my other exercises, just fail at the end point and then slowly work through the partials. It's how I like to train. It's not how you have to train, but it's how I like to train. So I mentioned earlier the thing about foot position and considerations with that. So one of the things that you need to realize is that the quads cross the knee, and that's it. Other than that, the rectus femoris, which crosses the hip, that's not really part of this conversation though. When we're considering ankle position in a leg extension, and you all, depending on where you are right now, you can sit down and just feel this for yourself. Straighten your knee, and then, squeeze your quad, and then point your foot down, okay? You don't have to do it hard, but just kind of relax your foot. You'll notice that like, you can get to the top, you kind of just feel your quad, right? But now, keep your knees straight and pull your toes to your face. Immediately, what you will feel is tension in your gastrocnemius, right, which is the outer calf that crosses the knee. Why do you feel tension there? Well, because you're stretching it at the backside of the knee by straightening your knee, and then you're stretching it even more by doing this. This is an exercise that goes by the name of a calf raise, a straightening calf raise, right, which is why it's great for the gastroc. So if you are actively pulling your toes toward your face, what you're going to experience is basically a nasty stretch on the outer side of the calf, right? And what that will do is it will directly act against your ability to knee extend or to leg extend. So essentially, by doing this, by actively really pulling up hard, you are creating, yes, more stabilization potentially on the backside of the knee, but you're also basically performing a joint action that directly resists you trying to leg extend. So you may feel more of a sensation in your quad by actively pulling your leg up like this, but it's not because of some voodoo fascial connection. It's because you're creating a joint action in a muscle that is directly acting against your quads. Now, you could make the argument that that is actually beneficial for some people, maybe who have knee pain, because there's basically a greater degree of, I'll say, stabilization from the outer calf by pulling the leg up like this. But if you don't have knee-related issues, if you don't have struggle, if you're not struggling with a leg extension in any way, my advice to you, this is the most simple takeaway of all, is to just ignore your feet and let them go where they want to go. I, for a long period of time, used to actively pull my toes upward because it just felt better, and I never tried to do it any other way. So over a long period of time, I've kind of had to like deprogram that in myself. So if you see me kind of my feet waving around doing weird shit, that's why. So overall, when you do this, you're not directly affecting the knee in terms of the quad, but you're directly affecting the knee in terms of the outer calf, which can create some, sensation-based stuff in the leg extension that's not necessarily good for the goal of training the quads. So as a consequence, leave your feet where they're comfortable. And if you have knee pain, experiment around with the different toe angles. But just for certain, recognize that there is not a hard rule around right or wrong. That makes no sense. In the same way that it wouldn't make sense that, if I were to say you have to press narrow or you have to press wide, that also wouldn't make any sense. And that kind of claim should not be taken seriously. Okay. It's kind of hard to talk when you've just done a leg extension set to failure. All right, so this is set 2. And this is my last set here on leg extension because I'm only doing 2 sets here, and that's okay. And if you only do 2 sets on stuff, that's okay too. Okay. Oh, God. All right, so now I'm going to move on to leg curl. And what I'm going to do that is I'm just going to put this at the top. Now I have this as a thigh pad anchor. I like to do the leg curl on this machine with one leg normally, but for whatever reason today I don't really feel like it because it takes extra time, at least just a little bit, and also more primarily because this pad really hurts. It's not actually well supported for whatever reason. And when I use 2 legs and the greater load tends to be the case that starts to bother my femurs. So also on this machine and on any seated leg curl machine, I see a lot of people rounding over doing this. I don't think that's inherently a problem or that it's bad. I used to kind of think it wasn't great, but I think in some instances it can work against the goal of trying to train the hamstrings in more of a stretch, because essentially what you're doing is you're rounding over at your spine. You're not necessarily bending your hips more. So what you want to do is you want to make sure that you can kind of arch your back. When you arch your back, automatically what will happen if your hamstrings are at a terminal length is you will feel pressure on the backside of your shin increase into the pad. So I don't know if you all can see my feet. I'm not actively moving my feet, but my hamstrings are actually starting to tug on the back sides of my legs just by arching. So I would start by just arching, holding it, and then if you can maintain that arch while you do the lean forward thing, cool, you'll feel a much greater stretch doing that, but you don't need to arch. As long as you can find a comfortable position, maintain the stretch, you'll probably be good to go. So what I'm gonna do, so that was my first warm up. I'm gonna go to my second warm up. And on this machine, just because as I mentioned, this pad is painful on my quads. And by the way, I've used full stacks before on different seated leg curl machines. I've never had pain like this. So it has nothing to do with the load. This is almost the full stack. So this is my last warm up. But the reason that with this one, I like to actually hold on to stuff here is because it decreases the amount that this needs to hold me down. So if this weren't fucking with my thighs, I would not be doing this lean forward thing. But I am because of that context. So that feels good. And I am going to start with the full stack. A similar consideration here, almost like in reverse of the leg extension, is the toe thing is the same. So if you actively curl up, remember that will basically stretch the gastroc more, which might actually allow you to involve more calf in the motion if that's something you want. Something I would advise against is actively pushing your foot down, just because in this context especially, the gastroc is a very important stabilizer in knee flexion and also helps actually just stabilize the knee when the hamstrings are pulling on the tibia. So this is an instance where I would err on the side of actively avoiding trying to like really shorten your calf to begin with. A lot of people do that and they feel a lot of sensation. I'm sure there are at least some instances in which that could be beneficial for someone in a pain circumstance, but outside of that, I would just let your feet relax or actively create a little bit of a pull upward, which I personally like to do just because it makes my knees feel a little bit more comfortable. So 2 sets here, both to failure. Okay. All right, so one other thing that I did not mention and show from this angle specifically, and I know this lighting probably sucks, so sorry about that, but I got to show it from this angle, is if you're struggling with leg extensions and leg curls, and you feel like you've tried everything in relation to the different ranges, pad positions, etc., and foot positions, what I would really try to pay attention to is rotation of your whole leg like this. So if you keep your knees straight, and again, leg curl or leg extension, you want to see your shins moving like this, right? So if I toe out like this and I move this out of the way, you all see how my knee is bending like sideways. So I want my knee to be bending in the direction of the pad. And a simple way that you can see if this is happening is just lower the pad like this and be like, okay, if my legs are here, see how my knees want to move my foot inward and outward? So try to start by like pointing your kneecaps at the ceiling and just seeing, can I move my legs straight up to down where the pad would have me? And then reverse engineer from there and pull this all the way up, right? And now, boom, you're moving straight in line with the pad. So In more technical terms, this is like hip internal and external rotation, if you're keeping your whole leg straight. Play around with this as a toggle. It's a very, very important thing when it comes to any kind of leg curl or leg extension, be it seated leg curl, lying leg curl, or any kind of leg extension. So anyway, second set of leg curls and last set. Okay, moving on. All right, so next up we have everyone's favorite, the split squat. Now, my goals with this split squat, just to be super clear, I'm treating this as a quad glute hybrid. Of course, some adductors are involved in that, but I wanted to show how I would set it up from scratch because there's a lot of adjustment stuff that needs to kind of come into play with this. So the first thing that I would advise when you're trying to set these things up is don't start from the top and then wiggle around like a moron until you figure out what the right position is. Start from the bottom and work upward from there. So I know for me that I like a heel elevation for this. Highly recommended for pretty much all of you, I would guess, if your goals are quad biased. And what I will do is I will basically, so this is just a guess, I actually haven't used this exact setup before. I'm just gonna look at, okay, where do I end up in the bottom if the plate is here? So this is kind of where I end up. I mean, that was a pretty good guess, I feel like. I think I'm gonna wanna move this just a little bit farther outward so I can be a little bit more over my front leg. Because I want about maybe 60 to 70% of the weight on my front leg and less on the back. Okay, so like you all see this? This is like knee is really far forward, hip is underneath of me. I'm gonna hold the dumbbells here. This trail leg is behind me, so my back leg rec fem is getting really stretched, and I'm focusing on driving through both of my feet on the way up, not just one. I think it's a big mistake to treat this like a pure single leg exercise because the back leg is there to actually stabilize your pelvis, right, and the rest of your body. So I also like flat foot on here, but you can also go balls of foot. I just find it more comfy to go flat foot. So this will be good. If I wanted to make this more glute focused, by the way, I would just probably forget about the heel elevation and I would start from, again, the bottom position and work up from here, where I would say, okay, here's kind of where I want to get to, right? More of a vertical shin thing, staying more over that front leg to ignore some of that back leg stimulus that I want here. So that was kind of sort of a warm up. My legs are kind of already warm from the curls and extensions, but I'm just gonna take a guess, let's say the 50s, and just see if I can jump right in to a kind of masochistic set here. So same thing, all the way to failure. I like to pause at the bottom too. Oof. Okay. All right, that was good. So I'll take maybe 90 seconds between legs and do the right leg next. All right, so breathing rate isn't completely down, but good enough. Right leg now, same deal, all the way to failure. Okay. Oh. All right, so we'll do one more of those, and then we'll move on. Um, After this, I'll just finish with adductors, which, because there's no seated adduction in this gym, I will jerry-rig a cable setup, which I think could be interesting for many of you. The only other thing I wanted to say to contextualize this day is that, I think I mentioned this earlier, I do calves on my upper body days. So I start with them on upper body days just because it kind of works out well with my split, and I just like this day to be short. And yeah, I just think that's a good lesson in programming too, which is much like with the volume conversation, you do not need to draw such hard rules around like what can go on what day. Like you can train any muscle group with any muscle group as long as you are making progress and recovering from session to session. Who the hell cares? So I train my calves with my lats and my pecs. I train my quads with my hamstrings and my glutes and my adductors. And in my head, those things have nothing to do with each other. I mean, there's some overlap with the leg curl, but if you're doing a leg curl in a way that is specific to your hamstrings, yeah, you'll feel a little bit of calf, but it's not enough calf to really interrupt tomorrow's calf training day. So for calves, I'm sitting around 12 to 15 sets per week. That can fluctuate a little bit just depending on how my feet are feeling. I recently started doing some running, so I'm just integrating that in slowly. And I also do cardio, depending on the week, usually 4 or 5 times a week, incline treadmill. So I'll do that after today. And yeah, so we'll do one more set here on either leg, and then we'll finish up with the adduction. Okay. All right, this will probably be the weirdest looking thing you've seen me do to date. So all this is a seated adduction. And because I don't have a adductor machine here, this is my next favorite thing. So a lot of people will make judgments about this exercise. Oh, it's unstable. Oh, it's hard to set up. Yeah, just freaking do it. And you'll see that it's not. So all you got to do is basically just use your hands as the pads, essentially. And so what I'm doing is I'm kind of pulling the handles into myself. I'm staying light on my feet. And I'm just squeezing. And it's really easy to hold. If you have a webbing on your knee, it's super comfortable. And I like to just spend time in that pause position where it's the hardest. So when you get out of it, there's really no great way other than to just drop the load. But that was the warm up. And I have gotten up to using 80 pounds on either stack here. And the failure point that I experience is in my adductors, 100%. So I don't really see a reason why it would be considered unstable. Okay. So another thing to note here is that when you're setting up the bench for this, play around. Remember that whole no hard rules thing applies everywhere. But play around with it. You don't want to be too far in front of the stack to where you're just getting pulled backward. Um, although what you could do is we could just do this to problem solve for that. So you can actually lean back against something, which now that I think about it, why haven't I done that? I don't know. But anyway, yeah, a little bit in front of the actual cable itself, so it's pulling a little bit of a backward angle. If you move too far backwards, it's gonna be really, really freaking hard in the squeeze. But if you move too far forward, again, it might just be pulling you back, kind of making you really unstable. So a nice middle ground here. Second set here, I only do 2 sets. All right, I know I said that was the last thing, but I'm gonna do some abs and keep things really simple here. Just a basic cable crunch. Thing that you all really got to keep in mind when you're doing this is a lot of people, instead of actually trunk flexing, which is what this is, right? Trunk flexing, trunk extending, spine flexing, spine extending, rounding, arching, is instead of doing this, what they do is they kind of pull themselves down with their hips and their hip flexors. So it's not like all of a sudden the motion is just going to become a waste of time if you do that. But hopefully you all can see the difference between me just hinging back and keeping my spine totally neutral and me basically fixing my hips and just moving through here. So what I would recommend is sit down on your on your feet like this, so your hips are just anchored and your whole lower body's anchored, and then do the crunch from there. And I don't know how this weight will feel. Okay, really light. I like to use a regular D handle, hold on with 2 hands at the same time. You can use a rope or anything similar if you would like to as well. All you need is just a load that's basically pulling your arms up like this. And last thing is just try to keep the arms static, right? So you don't want to be pulling with your arms like a lat movement. All right, so I did 1 set on the rope there. I'm going to do 1 set of hanging leg raise. Similar kind of theme here, but just because the opposite end of the body is moving, it seems a little different, but it's not. Instead of just thinking about pulling my leg up, this would be just hip flexion. I'm thinking about tucking on the way up. So essentially, I'm almost sucking my belly button in toward my body and almost back toward the wall behind me. And it's almost like the legs are following that. The legs are not leading. So the hip flexion will occur as a natural consequence of me tucking my leg or tucking my pelvis almost upward. So get a good exhale, maybe. And that's just tucking. Okay.
And then finally, just to hit the obliques a little bit better than the previous two variations, I'm just going to do a cable trunk rotation. Super convenient to do with a rope on this guy because you can brace your hip up against the machine. All right, that felt like a fine load, but I'm just going to figure out a better way to hold this guy.
All right, everyone. That was the leg day / leg day with a couple of ab variations, just one set of each. I want to kind of dovetail off of the conversation that I had earlier with you all about volume, which is that if you looked at the leg day that I just did on paper, it would seem like very little. Um, and a lot of people, when I have talked about how, legs are a low priority for me, I don't do as much volume for them. It can't, for some reason, it can't quite sink in with some people that like, it's number one, it's okay to do lower volumes for groups that are not as high a priority. But number two, also, like the volume that I did is evidently enough for me to continue to progress, get stronger. Like, as a for instance, I moved into this new apartment building in May, right? So you track that progress. It's about 3 months of training in this gym. I was not able to do the full stack of leg extensions for as many reps as I did it today. I was maybe able to do it for like 7 to 8. So if you're seeing the load go up on the same exercises over months, right, it's very likely that you are making some kind of progress. I mean, it is literally measurable progress. And a reason that one of the main reasons I have a bias toward doing failure training is because it takes a lot of the thinking and the guesswork out of lifting for me, both in the sense of like during the set, I'm not thinking about how many I'm trying to get. I'm just going until I can't. So that's a simplification for me. But also just in terms of like progress, it's very black and white. Like, okay, I did 8 reps to failure 3 months ago with this weight, and now I'm doing 14 reps or 15 reps to failure with the same technique. And so as soon as you standardize, a variable like effort, all of a sudden, yeah, that may have certain downsides in certain contexts. But for someone like me who's very comfortable with my exercise selection, knowing how to set things up, it's just so reliable in the sense that I don't have to wonder whether or not I'm making progress. And the great thing about it for me too is I get punished for overshooting or screwing up technique, right? Because let's say I picked too much weight, for example, on the split squat that I was doing earlier. Using too much load might mean that like I can easily sort of misgroove and lose my balance. And now all of a sudden I'm not able to do an actual set to failure that makes the tissue fail. I'm now all of a sudden having to manage my balance, right? Silly example, but just an example of many to illustrate the concept that standardizing any variable, whether it's volume or effort, is a great idea because then you actually have a reference point off of which you can make change. The problem that I see with many people is that there's just no standardization across anything. And so even though I train at different gyms because I travel, I train with different people to film stuff. Um, I always have a set sort of standardized number of sets per week for a group. And because I'm effort equating where everything is at failure, I never really need to wonder like whether or not I'm getting an appropriate stimulus. So it's one thing to just kind of arbitrarily be program hopping, but it's another just to kind of have a set structure of like, okay, I know I'm doing, 4 sets of quads during a week. And so regardless of what gym I'm at, I'm just going to do 4 sets where my quads are failing first. And so speaking to the concept of like more is more, less is less, this makes it much more easy to actually create an accurate appraisal and accurate assessment of how much you're doing and whether or not it's working. So, again, to the overall volume thing, I would actually advise, if I could talk to myself from a decade ago or whatever, 7, 8 years ago when I started lifting, I would say to myself, Ben, prioritize the quality over the quantity because ultimately the quantity is determined in the end by the quality. So if the quality is shit, then regardless of how much shit you pile on top of shit, it's still going to be shit. And if you build a kind of quote unquote unstable foundation for your training where you're just basically doing 15 to 20 sets per week because Mike Israetel said that XYZ group has this amount of recoverable volume, well, then you're not thinking for yourself. And eventually you're going to bump into hard objects that will make it very clear to you that you're not making progress. And then all of a sudden you're spinning your wheels for 2 years, wondering why like things aren't moving in the right direction. So prioritize the quality, take your tempos seriously, um, control on eccentrics, control on concentrics, try to standardize variables that you're comfortable standardizing with. You don't have to train to failure. It could be something else. It could just be sets and it could be relative effort. So maybe you don't want to do every set to failure, but you do every set to 1 or 2 reps in reserve and you're comfortable with that. Cool. Standardize it that way. Assess how much volume you feel like you need, assuming that you're recovering session to session. And just as a quick little bit of advice, if you're trying to figure out like, should I do more or less volume? Well, that always needs to be a question that is asked in reference to the outcomes you've seen. If you have no outcomes that you've actually observed, then there's no reason in asking that question to begin with. If you have no idea how many sets you've been doing, how much effort you've been putting into those sets, then there's no reason to ask, did this work or did it not work? Because you have no idea what it is. You have no idea how much volume you are actually doing. You have no idea how well or not you standardized effort. If you don't standardize exercise, then that's another variable that's not standardized. So overall, before you start to ask questions about how many this or how many that, try to actually create something for yourself. Like think for yourself, try to problem solve for yourself, assess results yourself, and then look at like, okay, how might someone with more experience than me look at this situation? Because a lot of times it has nothing to do with um, again, how much, but more like how. I would say 90+% of the time when I talk to people about their programming, most of the time it's just filling really obvious gaps like, oh, you're not doing any of this kind of exercise or any of this kind of exercise. Or it's more just about addressing the quality, as I mentioned earlier. So I'm kind of just repeating myself at this point, but I hope at least some of that somewhere in there was something you could extract value from. And I hope that overall this leg day was helpful. As always, please drop your questions if you have questions for me. Also, maybe just pose questions that I can use as prompts for the beginning of or the end of these types of videos. And again, I will continue to record these as I see fit when I feel like I'll enjoy it. And I hope you all continue to enjoy.